So originally today's video was supposed to be a look at some of these Switch games that I'm actually playing on the Steam Deck now, but because Helldivers 2 came out last week and has pretty much dominated my every waking hour to the point of about 30 or 40 hours in at this point, I figured, you know what, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Helldivers 2. Specifically, what it is, some of the things that I like most about my time with it so far, and then a few things that I did not like so much. So all that being said, let's just go ahead and jump right in, starting with what Helldivers 2 is all about. So Helldivers 2 is a third-person co-op shooter where you and up to 3 of your buddies can call down an orbital strike's worth of democracy on bugs, robots, and, well, actually that's about it at the moment. But still, there's a whole lot of enemy variety within these camps of organic and inorganic foes, and it's an absolute blast to squad up, drop in, and just go ham on dispatching the enemies of Super Earth with extreme prejudice. Also, I should point out that this is technically a sequel, but where the original Helldivers was a top-down shooter, Helldivers 2 makes the move to an over-the-shoulder third person for the most part. Although you can switch to first person when sighted in, but we'll get to that in a little bit. For now, just know that the whole third person move was a great one, and the entire experience is steeped in hilariously over-the-top propaganda that takes a lot of influence from Starship Troopers. So much so that I wouldn't be surprised to hear that there's been a massive spike in sales for that movie in the days following Helldivers 2's launch. So what's the big deal? I mean, there are a ton of third-person action-adventure shooters out there that let you squad up with friends and take down intergalactic threats, so what is it that makes Helldivers 2 so special? Well, for starters, it wastes almost no time at all getting you into the action. There's a tutorial initially that you can knock out in about 15 minutes or so, and honestly I'm glad that I played through it because Helldivers 2 makes a concerted effort to offer up the exact right amount of moment-to-moment tension. Not in a frustrating way, but in a gameplay-enriching way that kind of makes sense considering you're going up against killer insects and, well, Terminators for all intents and purposes. For instance, if you reload and still have 5 rounds in the clip, then you just lose those 5 rounds, so it makes sense for you to exhaust every bullet you have, except for one, and then reload rather than waste ammo. Also, considering you are a spacefaring soldier, you have a variety of armaments that you can call down from orbit to help turn the tide of battle when things get dicey. But it's not as simple as just pressing a single button to call in a grenade launcher or signal your ship to unleash a barrage of cannon fire on enemy formations. Rather, you have to input a series of D-pad button presses to complete the request, and then you still have to carefully consider where you want your ordnance to drop relative to you and your squad mates. That's because you can absolutely get crushed by an orbital drop pod, or shred yourself to bits with a poorly positioned airstrike or automated turret. So in addition to just managing your squad's formation and tactics in the midst of a firefight, you also have to carefully manage the logistics of resupply while bile-spitting bugs are exploding all around you. It's challenging, but in a fun, Soulsian way that makes every successful resupply feel like a victory in its own right, rather than just some frustrating thing that you have to do. And speaking of resupply, rest assured that every gun that you fire, whether that's a heavy machine gun, pistol, railgun, arc gun, or grenade launcher, they all feel weighty and satisfying to fire. That's thanks largely to some incredible sound design, and when you're running, diving, or jet boosting to safety, it's super satisfying to hear the god-awful squelching sounds of insect flesh getting peppered by round after round of machine gun fire. And that's just for weapons that you fire directly. Calling in beefier attacks for larger threats is super satisfying, not just because it's fun to nuke something from orbit, but thanks to a slight delay in laying down that sort of firepower, leading your target into position with the correct timing to make sure that it lands where it's supposed to is awfully fulfilling. And more so when you have a good team with you, because working together is pivotal for the best experience in Helldivers 2. So if you can support each other in combat and have the foresight to bring armaments that complement each other before you drop in planetside, then all the better. Of course, you'll want to be careful because friendly fire is very much a thing in this game, and if you're not careful, it's real easy to mow down your compatriots in the frenzy of a firefight with a bunch of automatons. And that's a really big piece of what makes Helldivers 2 work so well. Despite a far-fetched sci-fi premise, the whole thing is extremely grounded and realistic in its execution. And a lot of the video gamey conventions that you might expect or even prefer from similar games either don't exist at all, or at least don't apply in Helldivers 2. For instance, if you get shot in your legs won't work so well and you'll start moving more slowly. Get your arm injured and your aim will suffer. And when respawning, if you maneuver your drop pod to land on top of a bug on the way in, then you'll absolutely annihilate it in all likelihood, and in turn, if you don't watch your step, you can absolutely get crushed by a friendly resupply. Want to lay down a minefield to thin the ranks of an advancing herd of bugs? Great, go for it. But just so you know, you have to watch your step because those mines are just as lethal to you as they are to your enemies. Now, all of these things make perfect sense when you think about it, but so many games blunt the edge of things like friendly fire or environmental hazards that it really is a breath of fresh air to have a shooter that just doesn't pull any punches and expects you to play in a measured, considerate way. Sure, all of these mechanics are a bit more demanding than the average third-person shooter, but these are the same expectations that elevate Helldivers 2 above its peers. And it's because of the way all these mechanics work together that I would say that Helldivers 2 feels as much like, if not a lot more like, something like Ghost Recon than it does a game like, say, Halo. It's loud, it's punchy, and it can be pretty unforgiving, admittedly, but once you understand its expectations, I promise you it all comes together beautifully. Even beyond what I've already outlined here, there are dozens of little thoughtful mechanics that force you to rethink and ultimately adopt new strategies if you expect to survive. And for each victory in your holy mission to bring democracy to the galaxy, you'll be rewarded for your efforts with upgrades to your ship, new munitions you can drop into battle, cosmetics, firearms, and the like. Taking all of these different mechanics into consideration really does make Helldivers 2 an outrageously addictive experience, which probably explains why I've already dropped about 30 hours into it so far. But as much as I could go on about all the things that Helldivers 2 is doing right, and there are a lot of things going right for this game, there are a couple of things that I do have complaints about when it comes to Helldivers 2, or at least light considerations or concerns I guess I have moving forward as the game continues to progress. For starters, as much as I enjoy unlocking new gear and abilities for my Helldiver, it does seem like it takes a while to level up and unlock new stuff. It's not agonizing or anything, but it does feel slightly slower than what I'd normally expect from a game like this. And I'm hoping that it's just because it's a newly launched game that it really hasn't had the time to flesh out a broader range of unlockables, so maybe they're just intentionally slowing things down to keep people from maxing out and getting bored? If so, I mean, I get it, because, boredom would be pretty much a kiss of death for a live service game like this, but nonetheless, I really do hope they continue to put out a ton of interesting unlockables and that maybe that process gets sped up a little bit, but we'll have to see what happens as we get further away from launch. Speaking of which, there is a battle pass here and premium currency, but honestly, while that might be a turnoff for some, I think they present it in a pretty fair way here. You won't find any loot boxy surprise mechanic nonsense or anything like that, and while some of the paid battle pass gear does look cooler than the standard gear you unlock, none of it provides a major advantage over the free path, and there's a lot more free than paid gear on offer. So as it stands, I'm not terribly concerned about any shady monetization practices, but I'll always be a little bit hesitant when it comes to games like this. Although to be fair, out of everything that I have witnessed on this front in Helldivers 2, none of us really seemed overly greedy or, more insulting to me than what I would pay for in, the regular seasons that happen in Dead by Daylight or other comparable live service games. The only major difference is that in Helldivers 2, a lot of the microtransactions that are on offer seem to be demonstrably cheaper than what you would see in other games, and I think that's the main reason a lot of people aren't taking a lot of issue with this. And finally, the last thing that I hope they improve in Helldivers 2, which I'm positive is something that they're working on night and day right now to get fixes in place for, would be the server stability. Because I spent a lot of time this weekend trying to play Helldivers 2, but at least on a few different occasions I had to sit and wait in queue for anywhere from 30 minutes to even a couple of hours to play, but I guess that's what's going to happen when you have hundreds of thousands of players flooding in because your game got such excellent word-of-mouth marketing. Obviously, this is a good sign if the game's popular enough to cripple the servers, but still, I'd hate to see a relatively unknown game that's going toe-to-toe with AAA titles shoot itself in the foot because people couldn't get into, actually play it. And I'm sure they'll iron this out, or the player base will stabilize, but still, it's definitely kind of a bummer if you're pumped to jump on and play, only to be left out in the cold by overcrowded servers. Also, you know what, there is one more thing that I did not write down here, but I did want to point it out. This game does have a stamina bar, and I am personally of the belief that if you have a stamina bar in your game, especially one that's tied to your ability to run or sprint away from danger, that stamina bar should not drain if you're not in combat. So there are times in Helldivers 2 when I'm just, kind of running around with a buddy trying to explore and gather up as many resources as I can find before we have to extract, and whenever I have to slow down because I've exhausted my stamina bar but there's no overt threat around that would drain it, I just think that, it would be better if they, let you run a little quicker, especially considering there's no, Sparrow like in Destiny or any other type of vehicle to make traversal a little bit quicker. Maybe that's a pacing thing and they did that very deliberately, but yeah, just a minor complaint I wanted to point out. At the end of the day, it's still pretty incredible that Helldivers 2 is bringing this much value to players as a budget title. Obviously, the best way to play Helldivers 2 is with friends, but even solo, you can have a blast jumping in with randos to fend off encroaching threats on Super Earth, and this is exactly the sort of forever game that I love to randomly spend time with. So if you're a big sci-fi fan who likes your shooters to have a little bit more bite than usual, with a great sense that you're connected to a larger community of players, Helldivers is 100% worth your time. And I say that as somebody who has barely been able to put it down, and as much as I love making videos for you here on the channel, I am just itching to get back to some Helldivers 2 as quickly as possible. So all that being said, that is what my experience with Helldivers 2 has been like so far. What about you? Have you already checked out the game? So what has your experience been like? Assuming you were able to get in, please do let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for your time and hanging out here. I really, really appreciate you. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.